the new K5 turntable from OMA. It's been a 9-year process to get to K5, which is the little brother to big K3 turntable, which you may have heard about, read the review by Michael Fremer in Stereophile. It was on the cover of Stereophile a year and a half ago. And it actually is being reviewed now in the Absolute Sound magazine. I got that review. It was a very, very good review. Thank you, Jacob Halbrun. This, however, is K5. It's the little brother. But before I get going on this deck, I realized that I think I'd better say something about why we're making turntables in the first place. And that's a really important thing because, you know, we're not a turntable company. Most people think of OMA as a loudspeaker company or an audio company, but when you think about really iconic turntables, you think about, for example, SME, or, you know, one of the other companies in the space of this is Tektos, which used to be Microseki. Nakagawa, I think, is the designer there, and that's a guy who's been, you know, doing turntables, mainly belt drive turntables, for 50 years. So who is OMA to enter this rarefied market of, you know, ultra expensive turntables, more than $100,000 turntables, because this one is, even though it's a lot less expensive than K3. And that's a very good question. It's a question I'd be asking if I were you. And the answer is simple. From the very beginning, I wanted to give our clients the kind of sound that I had gotten myself accustomed to, the sound that I was, you know, using, which was either with idler drive turntables or direct drive turntables. And if it was direct drive, essentially you were using, you know, a Japanese super deck from the late 70s or early 80s. And the one that was the most common and really probably the best anyway was the Technics SP10 Mark II and also the much more rare Mark III. So I was getting those decks in the very beginning of what I was doing with OMA, actually before OMA. So this is already about 20 years ago. And I realized that the direct drive turntables needed to have very heavy basses. And there was a slate quarry near me, and I realized I could figure out how to make slate plinths for these turntables, and that's what I gave our clients. And this lasted, you know, really up until the period where we started to develop K3 and K5 with Richard Krebs, and I'll go on a little bit about Richard because he's responsible for this. So we were making these turntables kind of as custom, almost one-offs for our clients because they were buying whole systems. They wanted a turntable, and we don't do belt drive because belt drive just doesn't work properly. It's not a serious technology. It's kind of joke engineering for whatever bells and whistles you want to put on it, folks, but it's not real. It's not serious. Because once you run a direct drive turntable like this against the belt drive, it's just game over. So the thing was, where would we get these turntables? You know, and by the end, it was getting very difficult to find the original vintage turntables. Then they had to be, you know, restored, refurbished. Parts would be getting very difficult to find. And I realized that, you know, if we could make our own turntable from scratch that was really well engineered with today's materials and technology, we'd be really ahead of the game. And that's how I met Richard Krebs, because he had designed the ultimate modification for Technics, the SP10 turntable, which brought it up to a level I didn't even think was possible. I'll skip all the stuff about Richard and I, how we met, because there's tons of stuff, interviews that we did at Munich, conversations actually that were filmed, stuff that I've done on the big K3 turntable. So with K3, we were about halfway through, and, you know, Richard was saying, well, we're making the ultimate turntable that we possibly can make. And that was, it was a cost no object, no compromises whatsoever endeavor, K3. So it was big and it was extremely expensive because the cast iron that we were using and the way it was cast in one form that couldn't be, you know, screwed with on the outside. This made it extremely expensive to fabricate, to machine. And so, you know, Richard said, we could make a much less expensive turntable that would be, you know, almost as good as K3. Not quite there, but really there. And it would be that much better than everything else. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And as we went through the process of making K3 and getting it reviewed and released, and obviously, you know, marketing, it became clear that we were leaving a lot on the table by not creating a follow-up baby brother, hardly a baby, to K3, and thus we have K5. So I'll run through it pretty quickly. The difference is with K3, this is machined aluminum, and I'll return to that because you can actually see the evidence of the machining marks. K3 is cast iron, and inside it's filled with chambers that have been tuned that have a special kind of oil and a special kind of particle. And that's there to damp any vibrations or resonances. And this is the same. The ports are here, and also on the back, and it's the same kind of concept. But K3 was cast iron, and it had a non-rectilinear exterior form, which made it very difficult to machine because the placement of this object during the machining process in a CNC machine is very, very complex and time-consuming. This is machined out of a solid block of aircraft-grade aluminum, and you can see the machining marks. This is how it comes off the machine. And then we give it a clear ceramic coating so that it won't scratch in use. But you see those marks, and it's interesting because I'm very fond of vintage watches, and you know, the higher the quality of the movement, typically, the more beautifully you see these little Genève stripes, you know, these turning marks. This was also done on really cool sports cars in the 50s, especially like in England and in Italy. They would have turning marks on aluminum dash. Well, that's what's going on here. It's like, really, it's not decorative, it's the actual marks that the tool makes as it machines the outside of this big block of aluminum. But that means that we've simplified the production process, and this contributes to the fact that K5, this turntable, K5, has a much lower price point than K3. The base here, this is integral, but the plinth is an option. So if you don't get this plinth, and the plinth is made from solid phenolic, which is extremely well damped. This is layers of paper and a thermoset resin pressed together. It was also called bakelite. That was an industry term back in the day. This is an excellent material for a turntable plinth. But if you don't get this, because it's an option, the controls which are built into this plinth, they come as a separate controller on an umbilical, actually like K3. The arm also, this is not the Schroeder K5 tonearm, which you might have seen at Munich. We're waiting for the next one from Frank Schroeder in Berlin. This is actually a Schroeder Berlin design. In fact, this is pretty cool. It's what's called a CB arm, or captive bearing arm, but this is cool. It's a magnetically rotating head shell Frank made for me, even though he doesn't like making those. It's a pain in the ass. This is the CB long arm. So it's a great arm. But what I want to point out is any arm that'll fit from here to here or here can go on this. We could conceivably make you something that extends. I'd rather not do that, by the way. There's also a place for a secondary arm pod on the back. You don't have to try and show that because it's it's going to be too difficult. But the point is, you can fit just about any tone arm on this. I think you can go from like 8.5 to 13, maybe 14 inches, because this top plate is both integral to the structure of the turntable and is your tone arm board. And we can make you as many of these as you want. You take off the screws. It's extremely precise. And put the new one on, you don't have to make any adjustments. And it's extremely well damped as well. So the K5 turntable system, because it's so much smaller, it uses a smaller platter without the oil and particles in it. The platter is, it's less massive, so the motor is the same motor but downsized from K3. The bearing is the same bearing but downsized. The platter, as I mentioned, is similar but downsized. So we were able to get all of what's really amazing technologically about K3 into this smaller package, which looks even more like a vintage cutting lathe, which was the inspiration for this project, not trying to copy someone else's turntable, which is really what you see, but actually designing something properly from the ground up. And David D'Imperio, who's been our designer since day one, for example, David designed the AC1 loudspeakers and the mini loudspeakers. So I brought David back in to help work with us on this. This is essentially identical to the very first K series turntable, which it's called Keel. We call it K0. And we've gone through that many iterations of these decks to arrive at K5. We skipped there's no K4. So there's K3, K5. There's been a lot of work, thousands of hours of work designing and building both decks. The benefit that you get if you get a K5 is that all the work and all the money that went into K3 is sort of yours for free because you're not paying for it. I don't do prices in videos. You can request the price, but it's fully a third of the price, or 30% of the cost of a K3. You can look that up. So it's an amazing value, but it sounds absolutely incredible. I'm so proud that we were able to do this, and a huge thank you to Richard Krebs and his team in New Zealand for the design of this. I hope to see more of these getting out in the world. I think it's kind of a revelation of what the sound of these direct drive turntables is like compared to these belt drive decks that are, frankly, rather disappointing.